Well, the breaking defendant Trump news of the night is that Donald Trump has to give up his guns. Donald Trump, who has had bodyguards for many, many years before he had Secret Service protection, never had any rational reason to carry or even possess a firearm. But like many people who hope that a handgun might make them feel, I don't know, more like a man, Donald Trump owns 3 handguns, and he obtained a license to carry a concealed handgun, a license that the New York Police Department now wants to revoke. Under the headline, NYPD moves to revoke Trump's license to carry a gun, the New York Times is reporting, quote, the police department is seeking to revoke former President Donald J. Trump's license to carry a concealed weapon after his conviction in his New York hush money case. According to 2 people with knowledge of the matter, Mr. Trump had a concealed carry permit in New York and had 3 pistols registered under the permit, the people said. 2 of them were turned over to the police department's license division around the time Mr. Trump was charged in April 2023 with 34 counts of falsifying business records, according to the people with knowledge of the matter. The 3rd pistol had already been legally transferred to Florida. It is unclear whether it is still in Mr. Trump's possession. Under federal law and state law in New York and Florida, people with felony convictions are barred from possessing a firearm. So now that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, not only will he lose his license to carry a concealed firearm, it is now illegal for him to even possess the handguns that he never had any rational reason to possess. Even though Donald Trump doesn't need those guns and never used them, losing his license will feel like a man losing his possession of something important to him. It will feel like he lost all of that thanks to the unanimous verdict of 12 New Yorkers. And that will be a form of torture for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is used to having no one telling him what to do, but he is finding out that a lot of people can tell a convicted felon what to do, including judges and probation officers and the NYPD's gun license division. The Manhattan District Attorney filed a response today to Donald Trump's lawyers' requests to lift the gag order imposed on Donald Trump by Judge Juan Merchan, which prevents Donald Trump from commenting about witnesses and jurors in the Manhattan case where he was found guilty. Donald Trump's lawyers told Judge Merchan, quote, now that the trial is concluded, the concerns articulated by the government and the court do not justify continued restrictions on the First Amendment rights of President Trump. Prosecutor Matthew Colangelo told the judge in writing that the judge has, quote, an obligation to prevent actual harm to the integrity of the proceedings, to protect the orderly administration of this court, and to avoid risks to the administration of justice. These interests have not abated, and the court has an obligation to protect the integrity of these proceedings and the fair administration of justice, at least through the sentencing hearing and the resolution of any post-trial motions. And today in Florida, Donald Trump's favorite judge, Aileen Mercedes Cannon, federal judge who was appointed by Donald Trump, scheduled 3 days of hearings in the criminal case where Donald Trump is accused of violations of the Espionage Act and illegal possession of classified documents. Those hearings are scheduled for June 21st, June 24th, and June 25th. One of the defense arguments that Judge Cannon will consider in those hearings is that Jack Smith's appointment as a special counsel is unconstitutional and therefore the case should be dismissed. The judge will also consider the prosecution's motion to change Donald Trump's conditions of release to, in effect, impose a gag order on Donald Trump that prevents him from making false statements that, quote, pose a significant, imminent, and foreseeable danger to law enforcement agents participating in the investigation and prosecution of this case. The government's request is necessary because of several intentionally false and inflammatory statements recently made by Trump that distort the circumstances under which the Federal Bureau of Investigation planned and executed the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump has been lying and raising money on the lie that the FBI was, quote, authorized to shoot me when the FBI executed a search warrant at Donald Trump's Florida residence at a time in the middle of the summer when they knew Donald Trump is never there and specifically was not there. The prosecutors told the judge that Donald Trump has been spreading, quote, a grossly misleading impression about the intentions and conduct of federal law enforcement agents, falsely suggesting that they were complicit in a plot to assassinate him and expose those agents, some of whom will be witnesses at trial, to the risk of threats, violence, and harassment. In another issue to be considered in those hearings later this month, another one is the defense claim that prosecutors improperly pierced Donald Trump's attorney-client relationship by compelling the testimony of one of Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyers to the grand jury that indicted Donald Trump in the classified documents case.